touched in responding to a call to participate in a movement to do something extraordinary because of something we believe in. I don't know if young people today really sense that. But this evening, I'm going to ask Commissioner Dave Arian to come up. He's got a tremendous history in this community. You know him because of his ties with labor. But back in 1963, he did something out of conviction about people having a right to live in a house if they could afford to buy it. Dave, please share with us about your first arrest.
Right. Well, that wasn't my first arrest, but you know, I grew up here in San Pedro, went to San Pedro High, and you know, I'm going to just tell you a short story about what really influenced me and you know what has motivated me throughout my life. And this is a great event to do it at because it's clearly these were some of the greatest influences, not only Martin Luther King, but Malcolm X and Mandela and a series of other people. A friend that I met on the waterfront whose name was Nelson Perry, who's back in Chicago now. These are people that had a really dynamic influence over my politics and my life. But it really started with my mother and my father, particularly my mother, who said, "You're here to make a difference, Dave. You're here to make a contribution, and it's not about you." And that was instilled in my family, particularly by my mother at a very young age. I was like everybody else, you know, grew up during the Cold War period and going to San Pedro High, and I didn't want to have nothing to do with politics. Played basketball, you know, was involved in the sports process. And my sister was more active than me. She was 2 years older and says, "Hey, Dave, you're coming with me." And I'd go wherever my sister asked me to go. You know, I just followed her around. And there was who now is General Gravitt, but Pete Gravitt from the Gravitt family here in San Pedro, and two others. And we went over to Torrance, and I didn't know exactly why we were going. And we set up a picket line around, I think it was Del Webb's housing, and the first house they built, which they would show to people if you wanted to buy one, says no blacks allowed. You know, and that's how it was in Torrance at that time, okay? And throughout much of California. And so we set up a picket line, and they pelted us with stuff, and I asked my sister, "What the hell are we doing here?" You know. Well, it took a couple of years for me to understand what we should do. When Martin Luther King was marching with the Selma and Montgomery March, throughout the United States at the federal buildings, there were demonstrations in support of Martin Luther King and that movement. And me and my sister, my mother, and my brother went down to that demonstration in LA. My brother was going to college at the time. I had just gotten out of high school. And we participated, and then they made a request, how many people are willing to sit in? And so me and my sister told my mother, "We're going to sit in." And she says, "Well, you're going to go to jail, you know that." We says, "Okay, we're going to go to jail." And so we did. And they arrested 104 people. 54 of us went to Biscaloo Center, which were the males, and then the females. And then 2 days later, they sent us to the tomb or downtown, you know, to the main facility. They wouldn't arraign us on Friday or Saturday. They waited until Monday, so we would be in jail for 5 days. And that was my first real education, because talking to the people in the civil rights movement who were part of this arrest process, who were much older than me, had a very strong influence. And you know, this was, you don't realize it, you know, what kind of impact Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and a number of others had until you really get around an association of people who've had that experience and can relate that experience in terms of their life. Over the years, you know, our union, we were the first union to really, when Mandela was in jail and they threatened his potential execution, the longshoremen on the West Coast, based in San Francisco, and starting with a really good friend of mine, we started a committee within the ILW to support Mandela, and we refused to unload any ships from South Africa, and we started the boycott of South African cargo here on the West Coast, and we maintained that position for many years. All these experiences just grow on you, you know, and they tell you that you are here to make a difference and what that difference should be. For all of us, I think it's important to understand, and one thing that I learned from this Nelson Perry, who was a brilliant, you know, he was a bricklayer working in the casual hall along with me, maybe 25 years older than me, and he started telling me stories about the South. And he used to talk about a concept that I had no idea about, and what he talked about was a Negro nation. And what he meant by that was that Cotton Belt was primarily where the slaves were taken, was almost like a separate nation from the rest of this country because it was a separate economic entity. And the more you learned, the more you understood, the more you began to grasp this movement, you understand how central it was to social change in America. When Martin Luther King brought together the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and the movement for workers' rights in Memphis, that was so significant, so threatening to this government and this system that I believe they had to get rid of him. You know, I always believed that if he just stayed in the civil rights movement, they could isolate him to a certain point. But when he made that transition, when he saw that value, just like when Malcolm saw that value, you know, that it wasn't about race, it was only partly about race, it was about class, and it was about oppression, and it was about liberation. And I tell you, one of the most significant things that I ever saw is when they were hosing down the people in the South, and they hosed down that little girl, and they asked her, what was she, 9, 10, 11, why are you here? Freedom. Freedom. So I think, you know, these are the things that we can hold on to. These are the things that make a difference in our life. I worked my whole life on the waterfront. I've got so many awards and stuff like that, there's nowhere to put them, but all that doesn't mean anything. The thing that means the most is what you gave back. That's what stays with you. Your family, your grandkids, the movement. And those are the things that are real in life. All these other things, you know, all these other games, all this other money, all these other things you could do, yeah, that's important, a higher standard of living. But what Martin brought to us was a movement of why your life could be different, how you could fulfill your life, and not always be, it's all about me. So, you know, it's good to start this movement here. I really thank you, Robert, because I know you played a big role, and I think, I heard about this at a commission meeting. And she brought it to the commission meeting, and I said, yeah, I'm going to be there. So I'll be here next year, and we'll rally other forces and bring in younger people and bring in labor people and do it because we need to change this country. This movement that was started then is even more important to this day. There's more segregation, and today the segregation is in the prisons. You know, they've reintroduced this stuff in a different way, and we've got a heck of a fight in front of us. But let us here in San Pedro and in the harbor area say, let's do our part. Because if we do it here, that means it's being done everywhere. So thank you all for coming tonight.